Glastonbury 2014, and two of the most successful acts, Debbie Harry and Dolly Parton, are women of 67 and 68, the age of the grandmothers of some of the younger crowd. Only a few years ago this would have been hard to imagine, but it's part of a strong trend across many forms that sees women artists and writers reaching new levels of success and celebrity in late middle age. In literature, of course, women often make a brilliant late run. 2 years ago, some of America's most prestigious literary prizes were won by the previously little-known short story writer Edith Perlman at the age of 75. There are so many examples. Anita Bruckner, now 86, didn't even publish her first novel until she was 53. It was wryly called A Start in Life. 3 years later, she won the Booker Prize with Hotel du Lac. Or Penelope Fitzgerald, who died in 2000 at the age of 83 and had produced her first novel at 60, also scooped the Booker Prize only 2 years later. On the British stage and screen too, vintage performers such as Judi Dench and Maggie Smith, both of whom will be 80 this year, not only keep on working but have sufficient audience pulling power to have vehicles specially created to showcase their talents. In the visual arts, London's David Zwirner Gallery has just ended a highly successful show of new work by Bridget Riley, who at 84 is finding acclaim with audiences who weren't even born when she had her first early success in the 1960s. And perhaps the best example of late spectacular international stardom was the contemporary artist Louise Bourgeois, who passed away at 99, just as yet another giant new show was opening.
A key moment was 1990, when Jenny Holzer was selected as the artist for the American Pavilion in Venice. And then in 1993, Rachel Whitefried became the first woman artist to win the Turner Prize. And in 2000, Louise Bourgeois, who had been increasingly well known over the intervening years, it's true, became the artist whose solo show opened the new Tate Modern. There came a point where women were just not only more visible in galleries, in public institutions, in the organs of art criticism, but also suddenly seemed to be really much more interesting because nobody had been paying attention. I've always been a great admirer of Nancy Spero, who died in 2009 at 83. Success came to her relatively late, not right at the end of her life by any means, but she had 3 small sons and she became increasingly frustrated at being seen as a wife and mother and not as an artist. And when they came back to the States in 1964, she actually said something like, "Now is the time to be active. Now is the time to be active in the real world." And then what happened was that in 1972 she was one of the women who founded AIR, or AIR, which was the first women's cooperative gallery, which only exhibited art by women. And this is terribly important because you have to ask not just about individual ambition and achievement, but also where are the gatekeepers? What are the institutions? How do women get their work shown? Who buys it? Who exhibits it? How is it written about? Very good example of a contemporary woman artist, though she's a youngster at 70, is Phillida Barlow, who exhibited much less earlier in her life, not just because she had 5 children, but also because she was teaching a lot of the time. And she's now coming into her own. So for younger women artists now to have the role model of an earlier generation, many of whom worked on successfully into new or highly recognised old age, like Louise Bourgeois, like Winifred Nicholson, like Nancy Spero, like a whole slew of women who worked on into their 80s and 90s, is tremendously important. You have to be very determined to carry on as an artist into old age. You have to keep going to have that late period. Michael Craig Martin once said to me when I congratulated him on something or other, might have been his CBE, "Oh, well, if you just live long enough, Lisa, other people give up or they move away or they die off and you're still there. And suddenly you become much more prominent just because the others aren't round you." And there's some truth to that, and for women too.
Lisa, you've got some beautiful pictures on your wall by Paula Rego. Tell me a little bit about her and her career.
Well, I think she's a fine example of the late flowering of women artists, writers, and so on. Because although she, painted throughout her adult life, and she really only came into her themes, if you like, only found her genius, probably after her husband had died. When she was on her own, she suddenly found this extraordinary storytelling form of painting and printmaking, which was quite unique and gave us a vision of childhood, of womanhood. It did come late to her. Now, it came late for many reasons, you could say. It came late because she had children. It came late because her husband was ill and she did look after him. But also there was something about her settling into her role as a woman and an artist, which allowed that flowering to come into being.
There are all sorts of practical reasons why women might come into their own late on. Do you think there are also psychological ones?
There is a sense for a great many women of my generation and older that your children did come first, and you couldn't, when you were preoccupied with children and perhaps earning your keep, also do the writing or the painting in quite the same way that you could later on when the children had left home and when you were no longer the object of the gaze in quite the same way. Your art could be the object of the gaze more than you were. So I think those things play into the late flowering of women. Certainly I did, but I think my women artists and writer friends did lack a certain public confidence. We were perfectly confident enough in other ways, but it was very difficult to speak in public, and speaking and showing your work are not unrelated. Fighting for your place, unless you're incredibly tough, it's not quite the same then as it is now. I suspect for Paula, it was very much the same.
A lot of Paula's works, fairy tales, fables, mythology, but also this, I think, is from Jane Eyre, isn't it?
Yes.
So her work is about a woman's lot. Do you find that a lot of women who come to this kind of artistic fruition late on take themselves or the woman's lot as their subject? Is there a particular tendency towards that?
Well, I mean, I'd hate to generalize that because I don't think it's always the case. And, the confessional visual artist is quite late in the day. But nonetheless, there seem to be quite a few women doing that. And it's true too of Louise Bourgeois, if you think, although she's an earlier generation, say, than Tracy Emin, of course, and then Paula. But she found herself really when she began to do work which was completely linked to her difficulties with her father and her family in her childhood. And although when you look at her, it doesn't look like Paula Raigo's work, some of the preoccupations with what goes on in the family of childhood, what goes on in the power relations and the sexual relations within the family, do have a relationship to each other.
We've been talking about how women themselves come to this late flowering, but there is the other side, isn't there? It's that the world accepts older women, or has come to accept older women in a completely different way. Do you think there's a big shift in the public perception of older women?
Oh, absolutely. As older women step out into the public sphere more and more, they cease to be these feared old witches and hags or powerless grannies who only talk to babies that we have in our historic imagination. And so they can, increasingly, if they're out in the public realm, speak out.
There's no doubt that women's practical circumstances have improved, and with that come even higher aspirations. Perhaps most importantly of all, a lively public interest in the creativity of older women gives hope to us all.